But before we begin, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're recording today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So today's webinar aims to give you the latest insights and recommendations in the talent market and how your business can recruit and retain top talent. We'll be looking at our latest employee sentiment index results, along with Indeed's global data to bring insights that hopefully you can act on for 2025. I don't know if anyone can see if it's just me. I can't see a screen yet. Oh, you can see it? Great. Okay, perfect. So before we get started, a couple of quick things. You're in listen only mode, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you next week. Today's session will run for about 45 minutes and then we'll allow for 10 to 15 minutes of questions at the end. Just feel free to ask your questions as we go along. It's in the Q&A box, will be the easiest place for us to find them at the bottom of your screen. And we'll answer at the end. So I'd like to start by introducing our guest panelists today. So we've got Callam Pickering. Callam is the APAC Senior Economist at Indeed. Callam was previously an economist at the Reserve Bank of Australia, focusing on household spending and house prices. He's also worked as the economic editor at online publications The Business Spectator and Eureka Report, where he covered economic issues relating to Australia. Thank you, Callam. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No worries. And then we have Nick Ferry. Nick is Head of Solutions and Customer Success at Harrier Talent Solutions. He has over 15 years experience delivering talent management and talent acquisition programs for the likes of Amazon, AGL and Coles Group. Nick is focused on supporting customers to build skills-based talent programs, developing strong EVPs and skilling leaders in effective decision-making through lenses of capability, potential, diversity and inclusion. Thanks for joining us today, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have Kate Wilkinson, our very own Kate. Kate is the Chief People Officer at ELMO Software. She has over 20 years of diverse experience as part of the human resources function for privately owned, ASX listed and major global corporations within the technology, FMCG, mining, oil and gas, industrial services and construction sectors across APAC and the UK. And she is responsible for driving our people strategy across ANZ and the Philippines. So thanks, Kate, for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone.
All right, so let's just dive right in. The first topic I want to touch on is how employees feel about the job search going into 2025 and what top talent might be looking for right now. So the new year's begun. Employees often reassess their career goals, which makes it a critical time for businesses to both attract and retain talent. Every quarter, we survey 1,500 employees around Australia and New Zealand with our Employee Sentiment Index, or ESI. The aim is to gauge employee perception of economic security, wellbeing metrics, career plans, salary perceptions, and priorities for new jobs. And at the end of last year, we were interested in finding out attitudes towards searching for new jobs in the new year and the views of the recruitment process. So unsurprisingly, I guess, 65% of both Australian and New Zealand employees believe the start of the year is a good time to look for a new job. And interestingly, about 1 in 4 employees across ANZ think they're not in the right role for them. So this might suggest that a significant proportion of the workforce might be considering a career change this quarter. It also might not surprise you that the younger generations, so we're talking about Gen Z and millennials, are the most likely to be dissatisfied. That could mean that there are both challenges in retaining your top talent, but also opportunities as talent becomes available. So Callam, I'll start off with you. Based on Indeed's data, what trends are we seeing in job searches during the new year compared to other times of the year? And how does that compare to the number of job postings? You're on mute, Callam.
I am on mute. So I think that the mentality for a lot of Australian job seekers is new year, new job. And that's certainly consistent with what we tend to see on the Indeed platform. In the past couple of years, job seeker searches have been around 1/3 higher in January than we typically see in December. And in fact, job seekers are consistently more active in January than any other time of year. We tend to find that job seeker activity is a little front-loaded, with more activity in the first half of the year than in the second half of the year. The one exception being that Easter period in either March or April, which tends to be a pretty low point for job seeker activity. Job seeker activity does tend to ease quite a bit in the final few months of the year before falling sharply in December when many of us go on holidays. From a hiring perspective, seasonal hiring patterns tend to be quite different. So peak hiring actually occurs from August to October in most years, and that coincides with below average job seeker activity. Hiring activity does tend to be a little bit elevated in February and March, but not so much in January. So what I find interesting when you sort of piece that together is that it seems as though job seekers work off a bit of a, calendar year. They're most active at the beginning of the calendar year, whereas from a business perspective, they tend to work a little bit more off a financial year. So they're more active in the new financial year, not so active in the new calendar year. So there is a bit of a divide there between what job seekers are doing and what employers are doing. And I think there's probably some opportunities there for, the savvy job seeker or the savvy employer to maybe take advantage of that difference in sort of behavior to potentially attract more talent or find it a little bit easier to find a new job.
That is super interesting. Actually, I would never have thought of it that way, but I think that is quite common, right? The more activities in that first quarter of the financial year for businesses. Nick, off the back of what Callam's saying about the job market, what do you think top talent is looking for right now, and what makes a company desirable to apply for?
It's a great question. I mean, I think probably quite apart from the January anomaly where people tend to come back from a break and feel a little bit ready to throw some applications in and see what happens for the new year, excluding that population. Look, I think in general, what we sort of see across the talent teams that we support and the talent leaders that I talk to is regardless of what collar the worker is wearing, they're looking for fulfillment in their work, ideally happiness in their work. And I think increasingly so, as this new generation starts to take hold in the workforce, looking to find ways to fit the work into their life, less so the other way around. So what we see the savvy employers doing is talking to the candidate market much more about ways that they will make them feel as an employee, less so about compensation. Compensation is still at the core of how to talk to the talent market, but flexibility factors beyond remote work, how they're going to be valued as an employee, giving people access to technology, giving people tools to be productive and safe at work. These are the sorts of things that talent is looking for. So I think that ladders up to smart employers, developing a really well-crafted employee value proposition. So that is to say, simplified ways to tell the market what you're going to offer the talent. And those that do that well are really reflecting what the current employees are actually saying. So they're surveying their employees well. They're asking what's important to them, and they're getting a real open feedback loop from the talent market around, why did you apply? What was most interesting about our positions and about our company? And that's reflecting in a number of ways, right? So we know that Indeed's data tells us that around 85% of candidates that apply through the Indeed platform and see ads aggregated out there into the market actually look at a company's reviews before they apply for a role. And so the smart employers are also sort of starting to think about that review culture, extending their EVP and saying, well, hey, employees, if you value life here at our company, start to tell the marketplace about it, and that will reflect in like-minded and similarly valued employees jumping on board. So I think those are the things that people are looking for, and finding ways to cut through all of the advertising language out there and find, hey, am I going to be happy working there? I think that's important.
Yeah, very well said. That actually, that's, I guess, brings us to Kate, because I guess that our customers and prospects who are joining today are keen. How does ELMO communicate their EVP to potential candidates who are searching for new role, and how do businesses, I guess, communicate that EVP?
Yeah, I mean, we don't take it for granted that our brand is known. I mean, ELMO's been around for a long time. So we're always ensuring that we are representing our brand and keeping up with, with contemporary benefits, and adjusting our benefits and perks. I think we communicate through, well, typical ways of communication would be job ads, LinkedIn, our own website, word of mouth. We collaborate through specialist agencies that represent our brand and expand our reach to niche skill sets. I think something that's really important, just going back to the brand in general, is that we want to be at the front of a candidate's mind before they even start looking. We want to be known so that when they see an advert, they don't need to do too much discovery on who we are as a business. They already feel familiar with us, and that they feel comfortable, because it's obviously, quite a big step to take to go and search for a job. We also want to get our brand to people before they've kind of made their mind up to search for a job. If we're reaching out to them, they'll take the call and say, hey, I'm not looking yet, but there's a few things where I am now that aren't working out, and I'm going to see how it goes. And typically we know that there's a 6-month psychological process when someone started to think about other alternatives. And if that's not being fulfilled, I think Nick just talked about fulfillment. If they're unfulfilled over a 6-month period, by the time they get to that 6 months of resigning, it's too late to persuade someone to stay, because they've gone through that psychological process. So we kind of want to be able to talk to someone in those stages, just in case they do decide to change roles. Another really important factor is those authentic candidate conversations, the human factor, the human representing our brand, and that comes through our talent acquisition consultant. Sharing personal stories. We want to make sure the hiring managers during the interview process share their own journey at ELMO and why they work for the business. So it brings it to life, and it evidences what we're trying to show through video or through those channels. We also use real life data. So, and we also don't use a one size fits all approach. If a candidate's looking for a career pathway, we'll provide information such as 16% of our workforce last year had internal advancement opportunity. So we're evidencing it through data and then backing it up with the stories. So
yeah, awesome. And I can personally attest to the talent acquisition specialist at ELMO. Just meeting her the first time, the joy that radiated out of her is such a wonderful first experience. All right, we'll move on to emerging trends. Callam, we know that Australia is typically 6 to 12 months behind global trends. So based on Indeed's data from the US and EU, what can we expect to emerge over the upcoming year for HR professionals in ANZ?
Well, I think there was 3 main areas where I'm really interested to see how global developments impact Australian hiring over the course of 2025. The first was with regard to Gen AI. So usage of these technologies in the workplace is still very much in its infancy. Many companies are dipping their toes in the water, but it isn't widespread just yet. But some of the growth that we have been seeing globally and in Australia has been quite remarkable. Just to put some of these numbers into perspective. So in January, 0.24% of Australian job postings on Indeed mentioned Gen AI or related phrases. Now, that's not a big number. It's just 1 in about every 410 job postings on the website, but it's a rapidly growing number. It's up by 2.9 times over the past year alone. And we've seen growth of that nature, globally. It's been really quite remarkable. Now, right now, usage of Gen AI tools is still very much concentrated. It's still primarily about big business, multinationals. And so adoption in Australia will likely take guidance from what's happening overseas, largely in the US, I think. My expectation for 2025 is that we're going to see considerable growth in that area. Maybe not as strong as we saw over the course of 2024, but still, very, very strong. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, particularly given how fast these tools are evolving in terms of what they can do and the scope of them. So I think that's going to be a really interesting area. Secondly, I think remote work is another area where global trends may influence Australia. So in the US, there is a big shift towards getting staff back into the office, particularly among some of their bigger employers. We are seeing a bit of that in Australia, but at the same time, the share of job postings in Australia that explicitly mention remote work is actually higher now than it's ever been before. It was about 15% of all job postings in January. So we're not seeing that sort of decline that you might be expecting given some of the conversations that are being had around return to office policy. So I think that's going to be really interesting. What we do know, though, is that job seekers value that flexibility, that ability to work from home very highly. So I think there's going to be an interesting pull and push dynamic between employers and job seekers on that side. And we may see that play out in the likes of the US and Europe a little bit earlier than we are seeing in Australia. And finally, I think, diversity inclusion is going to be really interesting. So following the Trump inauguration, there's been huge pushback against diversity and inclusion policies in the US. Will that empower companies and organizations in Australia and other countries to change direction? Well, it's certainly too early to say at this point, but I think it's clearly going to be one of the big issues in 2025. What I do know is that Australian companies have, on average, sort of embraced diversity and inclusion policies to a greater degree than we've seen in the US. So, for example, around 37% of Australian job postings mention diversity and inclusion in their job descriptions. And it's almost doubled over the past 5 years alone. And the share of Australian postings that mention diversity and inclusion is about twice as high as is the case in the US, and that was before all this Trump stuff. So, there is a different attitude towards diversity and inclusion here, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see how what we are seeing overseas does impact Australian employers.
Yeah, 100%. And Kate, I think we were talking a little bit about this off camera, so to speak. What were you, when you were saying some interesting things about this?
Yes. In terms of the DEI, yes. Obviously, I was a bit of a reaction, and I'll speak from experience because, at ELMO, private equity owned, many years ago, but pre-COVID, it was a 100% male executive team. At ELMO, we're now a 50-50 gender split, which I'm proud to say. And we saw 20% growth as a business last year. That's cascaded through our whole leadership. So we've got around 46% female leaders now, against the 54%. But that's something that we've worked hard towards, and we've created WELMO. We've got some DEI committees that have really supported the business to move forward. And it's interesting because I know that Deloitte, US, they've ceased their DEI programs. Disney's restructured their DEI to focus more on business outcomes. But then we've seen Deloitte's own research talk to organizations with inclusive talent practices generate up to 30% higher revenue per employee and greater profitability. I read a Forbes article last year, 2023 Forbes article, and that was describing how companies prioritizing DEI tend to have more engaged and inspired employees. Obviously, that leads to greater success. It fits in with the theme on this webinar around retention, and it has a positive impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, totally. It's going to be a very interesting, I think, 12 months. Just we won't get political here, but it'll be interesting 12 months, I think. Let's move forward to attraction and retention strategies, and talking, I guess, diversity and inclusion is obviously something that the guys just mentioned is important. But Nick, what are the in-demand skills that are most sought after in the talent market at the moment?
It's a great question. There's always a few answers to this question, so it's never a straightforward one. I think just to address the diversity and inclusion conversation as well, there are some green shoots of really sensible conversations coming, maybe not directly out of what Mr. Trump is saying, but through some CEOs who are looking to find ways to be a bit more practical about diversity, inclusion, and equity in the talent acquisition process. And at least from my perspective, that can be positive in the sense that it seems to be really, really good investment from a lot of organizations in pure fairness. So looking to find ways to reduce bias and make better, more repeatable hiring decisions, and create more inclusive language in advertising and things of that nature, but being less quota-based and less prescriptive around what they want to see as an outcome of those activities. is leading downstream to much more honest diversity in organisations. And I think that's a brave stance to take for some organisations to say, hey, we're not quota based, but let's really concentrate on providing a really fair and consistent approach to our hiring practices and our attraction practices, and having the right tools to help our recruitment teams check their biases at the door and focus just on the capabilities that are needed to get the job done. So I think we might see a bit more of that in the next 12 months or so in Australia, certainly. To your question about talent short markets, one of the things that people find interesting when I say this, and people always sort of raise an eyebrow, is that Australia and New Zealand together are some of the most advanced talent markets in Australia. So we have really, really high quality recruitment agency practice, really, really high quality of talent marketing practice, and internal talent teams and RPOs that support are among the best in the world. So certainly in line with the maturity that you see in the UK, EMEA, US, Canada, places like that. And that's interesting, right? Because we tend to be 6 to 12 months behind the market, as Callam said, from a trends perspective, but we're right on the pulse in terms of strategies to engage talent. I think the reason for that is because we've got some perennially short talent markets. You only have to look to our geography to understand why. It's hard to move people around the place, but also some of the industries that account for most of our GDP obviously demand a heavy load on our talent pool, right? So mining being a key one of those, the infrastructure sector, transport sector, and others. So there are some perennially short roles, talent short roles. The medical sector, doctors and nurses, always really, really hard to find in general. Always a high degree of international mobility in those sectors, and really, really challenging to get people to move around Australia, given how far away each city is from each other. So I think there's a lot of micro markets in Australia. And so we find ourselves, and New Zealand is no different, despite the differences in geographies. I think it is one that we're finding all the time is that each customer that we approach or each talent team that we support, they tend to have some real challenges with key roles. And it's not until they understand the data, maybe that's from the ABS or from Indeed's data or Seek or LinkedIn or others, that they get an understanding of who are the talent competitors, how many candidates are actually available to us, what level of training and reskilling do we need to do, or in fact, are there ready to go talent available that we can go and source. So it's often surprising. And it comes up for us in a lot of key ways. Truck drivers at the moment are really, really difficult to find. Trade skills really, really difficult always to find. Care workers in regional Australia, very, very hard to find. So there's no boundary to where there are critical role shortages and challenges in Australia. I think what's most important, though, in all of that is teams' willingness to invest in data analysis to understand where their locations are, what skills they need in each location, and to really understand what talent might be available, to really put those right strategies in place from an attraction perspective, to then go about addressing them, whether that's relocation, whether or not that's enticing them to come across from another organisation, whether that's around your training and development package. There's a lot of investment that I think needs to go into really understanding your market, so acting as a marketer, knowing your demographic, before you go ahead and start to source talent. So the kind of mentality of advertising and hoping that you will address the market is long gone, and it's really time to start to understand which shortages you're dealing with, and that can change year on year, right? So I think that should be a key focus for talent acquisition teams.
Yeah, amazing. And this next question I have for Callam is kind of sort of connected, but not really. So my question was going to be around the shortage of talent in these in-demand roles. Is it primarily due to a lack of available workers, or are there also indicators that wages in these sectors might not be keeping pace with demand? But just off the back of everything you're saying, Nick, as well, I'm kind of, it's clear, like, beyond salary, right? So I'm sort of shifting the narrative a little bit just to kind of ask Callam in general, what wage trends are showing us, maybe just in overall, and how are they influencing the labour market?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree that to a large degree it reflects lack of suitable workers for certain sectors. I mean, it's just difficult to address the demand that we're seeing in the likes of the healthcare space or education, where, no matter what you do on the wage side, you've still got a shortage of people, and there tends to be shortages across, many markets globally, which means we're all sort of competing for the same global talent pool. But there is a lot of interesting things that are going on the wage side, which I think are also quite important. So I think a lot of the skill shortages or at least some of the skill shortages that we have seen in recent years have been exacerbated, at least partly, by some inflexibility around wages. So employers haven't been quite as responsive to skill shortages as I personally would have expected a few years back. I would have thought, given the job boom we have had since 2022, the post-pandemic job boom, I would have expected a much stronger wage response from that than we ended up getting. There are certainly pockets of very high wage growth. So, for example, in the 2023-24 financial year, around 45% of jobs received a pay rise of at least 4%, with around 15% of jobs receiving a pay rise of at least 6%. So that's pretty good. But that reflects wage gains for existing employees, and recruitment has been quite different from that. So on the recruitment side, what we typically see is that wages can be really inflexible. So Jobs and Skills Australia, in a report released in 2023, estimated that around 1% of employers were willing to change their pay offering in a job advertisement to attract more talent. So in fact, they were more likely to give up on filling a role or even restructure their organisation than they were to increase advertised pay. Now, not only are employers, inflexible around advertised pay, they also tend to not be very transparent around pay as well. And I think both of those are problems. So 38% of postings on Indeed feature pay information. And Australia does tend to lag behind other comparable countries on that front. The likes of the US and the UK are well above Australia on those metrics. We know on Indeed that jobs that have pay information typically receive around 30% more apply starts than those jobs that lack that information. So a lack of pay transparency has probably made recruitment much more challenging for some Australian employers. And the fact that they're being not very transparent, but even when they are being transparent, they're being pretty inflexible, probably isn't helping either. I do tend to think that with regards to pay and offering more pay, it does tend to be a bit of a zero-sum game, in the sense that you tend to attract candidates from elsewhere rather than sort of broadening your talent pool. But certainly I think there's been a fair bit going on in the pay space that probably hasn't helped at least some businesses across Australia attract talent.
Let's put a pin too in the when you get the salary information, because we are going to return to that later. But I guess beyond salary, it's a conversation in wage. It's always going to be a hot topic, and probably something that everyone will agree is tricky to get right, perhaps. But beyond salary, and talking about like effective sourcing strategies to engage with talent, Kate, what tools and strategies do ELMO use to identify and get talent that's not just salary based?
Yeah. And I understand, I guess, where I'm talking about recruiting for corporate roles within SaaS technology business. And I previously worked for an industrial services business that was hiring, truck drivers, and it was a challenge, particularly in remote areas. So I understand that there's different nuances in terms of how to attract talent. But for our space now, we're obviously building talent pipelines, engaging with talent who've applied for roles over the course of the last 2 years. We keep in touch with talent who've left. We call them boomerangs if they come back. Our referral programs work really, really well, and they have done for over 5 years. So particularly with new talent that is coming into the business and accessing their network, we're a very network-driven organisation anyway, so you never know who you're going to bump into at a conference that you might be working with 2 years down the track. So there's always that consideration in mind. you know, and then it's really important to deliver that 5-star candidate experience, whether it just be an introductory call or, you know, just to understand the business a little bit more. Someone's applied for a job and they just want to know where they stand in the process. So the human factor, again, is super important. The TA consultant needs to have those really good communication skills in pitching the business authentically, and then also being proactive about how they're engaging with talent. Another key part of that candidate experience is obviously the process. You might have the best TA person, but you've got to have your processes right as well. We've obviously got a recruitment system in place, but I think you know, a lot of complaints in the past from being in recruitment prior to ELMO, and Nick, you might relate to some of this, is when you've gone through a recruitment process without an approval in place, and then you know, the hiring manager wants to offer the candidate and they're like, I'm so sorry, it's been blocked because it wasn't fully approved. So it's obviously a question I'm sure that recruiters would ask before they work on it, but within our system, we've got a requisition at the very start of the process. We've got all the benchmarking, the salary information, the budget information. The recruiters will feed into that as well along the course of the recruitment process around, is that relevant to the external market? You know, as Callam's talked about, wage shifts are rapid and sometimes benchmarking doesn't always keep up with that. So that intel is placed into the system. And so there's an approval at the start to go and recruit, but then they can highlight and flag that area during the process rather than get to the end and not be able to offer the perfect candidate. And another part to that would also be, you know, that the candidate's looking at how we're navigating our systems and processes, because that's probably what they're going to experience when they join the business. So it's important that we're showing that efficiency. And just to quote some of your ESI data, Elise, the ESI found that 40% of Australians and New Zealanders found no salary information until late in the process, which can obviously impact on a recruitment process. It's important to ask that question at the start so you can match if your budget matches their expectation.
Yeah, 100%. We were going to ask Nick a bit more in detail about candidate frustrations in recruitment, but I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to quickly go over, the 40% of Australians and New Zealanders felt the lack of salary most frustrating. So, you know, keep that top of mind, everyone, when you're doing it. Prolonged decision making, also a huge issue, you know, getting feedback, and surprisingly, 1.4 million employees or working Australians found, and 330,000 New Zealanders found the recruitment experience terrible in their last job seeking experience. So it is, you know, these kind of strategies are still really relevant and important. But I'm going to move forward to once you've found the great talent and you've hired them, the key is to then hold on to them. So Nick, my question to you is, with your experience with employee retention strategies, what are the key priorities organizations should focus on to essentially retain top talent?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, right? So extending on what Kate was rightfully saying around all of these external talent engagement strategies, I think not enough of us focus on internal talent engagement strategies. It's kind of the attracting the people we've already got scenario. So I think there's a key mindset shift that a lot of organizations need to take in terms of treating their employees like external candidates and marketing to them, and really maintaining a level of engagement with talent, not making an assumption that that's done by their line leader or by the supervisors around them, but really focusing on you know, this amazing talent pool that you've invested in, and thinking about how to give them pathways. We know from a lot of data from multiple sources that that's really, really important to people. I think if we step back a little bit and think about, you know, what are the things that people are asking for in order to be retained? Well, they want the right culture, so that is how work is done, that suits them, and they want to feel the right way. I mentioned earlier workplace happiness, the climate of the organization, how they feel, how they enjoy rocking up to work, being themselves, is really, really important to retention. And that plays a really, really big factor, we know, in retention. It could be alignment to the mission of the company, or the way that the company addresses itself in its community that it works in, or it could be simply the way that they approach mentoring, development, job design, safety, things like that really give people a really hard time thinking about switching, given how well they're treated at work. So we know those factors are really quite important. The big one that we spend most of the time talking with CEOs and chief people officers like Kate about is hyper-personalized development opportunities. So that's from career pathway development through the way that they experience learning, and having a multimodal way to experience learning, starting at the onboarding journey, doing that post-recruitment, post-offer part really, really well, giving them a really good early start into the organization, and sustaining that experience over the long term with access to opportunities, be that gigs or projects, or specific tailored learning. More and more, that's becoming quite important for talent, I think. So, and the last one I'd say that that we find ourselves spending more and more time talking to people about is wellness. So not just the 2021, 2022 post-COVID minor investment in gym memberships and things like that to get people back to offices, but truly thinking about how to make sure employees are their best selves, so they can contribute at work and want to stay in work. And so, health benefits for families, mental health support, things of that nature, taking a more holistic approach to wellness, I think is really, really important for retention across all levels in Australia and New Zealand markets moving forward. And I think you'll start to see that kind of language maybe supersede some of that D&I language, Callam, that you're seeing in job ads maybe in 2025.
Yeah, super interesting. I am going to skip straight to the innovation in recruitment, and probably something a lot of our listeners today are going to be interested in around technology and innovation that's going to have more impact on recruitment and HR this year and beyond. Callam, you mentioned before, Indeed has done research around the likelihood of Gen AI replacing specific work skills. What can you tell us from the results?
Well, I think that the good news is that right now these tools are unlikely to replace entire work skills, let alone replace entire jobs. These tools, as they currently are more likely to complement existing tasks than they are to replace them. So last year, Indeed conducted research that assessed the ability of Gen AI tools such as ChatGPT to perform a variety of work-relevant skills. We assessed more than 2,800 work skills, classifying them according to the likelihood that Gen AI could replace a human performing that skill on a scale from very unlikely to unlikely, potentially likely, and very likely. We found that there wasn't a single skill where Gen AI was very likely to replace a human, but there were plenty that had the potential to be replaced, particularly if the quality of these Gen AI tools improve over time, which we expect will be the case. We then use these skill assessments to estimate the jobs that were most and least exposed to Gen AI. We typically found that the most exposed occupations were knowledge-intensive ones, particularly those involving repetitive or data-driven tasks. The most likely skills to be replaced were things such as, working with Excel, various writing tasks, things of that nature. So it makes sense that those knowledge-intensive roles were highly exposed. The tech sector tended to be the most exposed sector, but we did also see high exposure across a range of back office roles, accounting, marketing, admin, and even in HR. The most limited exposure was typically found in more physically intensive roles, in areas such as childcare, nursing, and construction, where Gen AI may be able to support on some tasks, but certainly not the most critical tasks involved in those roles. My conclusion, based on our research, again, was that Gen AI is more likely to complement workers rather than replace them. Some roles are going to benefit, a great deal from these tools, particularly to boost productivity and reduce time spent on repetitive or boring tasks. My view is that, because of these productivity benefits, I think there is going to become a bit of a wage divide between those sectors that can utilize and really benefit from Gen AI tools versus those that can't. I think that's probably going to be sort of a big issue going forward, more so than this sense that, the robots and the computers are coming to take our jobs. I think, people aren't going to lose their jobs to these technologies, at least not anytime soon. But I think, there is the potential you could lose your job to someone who can use these tools well. I think that's probably going to be the big issue going forward.
Yeah, super well said there. Nick, off the back of that, how do you think technology is changing the recruitment landscape, especially in your role?
Yeah, Callam nailed it. I think 5 years ago the tail wagged the dog. The talent acquisition functions, RPO businesses, things like that were looking for driving efficiency and cost out of businesses were informing technology companies' development. 2025, org design, the way recruitment is done, for example, is often led by the availability of technology, but it's confined into what Callam was saying. It's around areas where process efficiency can rebase the work that people are doing. And so the great news here is that really cool things are happening to enable recruitment. The sheer access to data and information and ability to synthesize that information like never before means much faster access to really, really high quality recruitment marketing efforts and ability to screen and select candidates much more quickly, address your talent pools, things like that. Getting rid of manual task processing. That means, you no longer have to ring up a hiring manager and book that interview in necessarily over the phone. That's all done. So you can focus much more on higher value tasks. As Kate was explaining in the ELMO journey, providing a really high touch customer experience internally to ensure the right decisions are made. The candidates feel really valued. And we know downstream, particularly when we're working with retailers, that can have a net impact on actually how much share of wallet you get. You may be surprised how many candidates are customers of a brand that are impacted by recruitment technology. So it's just enabling a better experience. So I think everything Callam said is right. And really the last mile, in that sense, is to start to think about smart ways to use Gen AI or the machine learning capability at very least in your current systems to be able to reduce repetitive robotic tasks and shift the value of the work that's done by teams like recruitment, which obviously has a net impact on candidate and customer experience downstream. So certainly that's a focus for us and most of our customers.
Nice. Kate, it's obvious we are a HR tech company. How are we adapting and evolving the technologies to suit our product suite?
We're moving super fast. We've started with recruitment. We've got AI enhancements coming into the ELMO recruitment module. So you'll be able to opt in and you can discover top candidates faster. AI is going to match a role with a candidate CV and then provide a shortlist. So it's going to save a lot of time and accelerate the hiring process. And just to the points that Nick and Callam have made, I think it's really key to understand strategic workforce planning. What are the skills and capabilities that are being built for the future? How can we then look at that in our AI when we're matching roles to candidates and be able to factor in that wildcard candidate that has those competencies or behavioural traits that will adapt once AI comes in? So yeah, it's all moving very quickly with our products, and I'm excited because we get to try them out. But those who have ELMO recruitment, you'll hear more about this in the coming month.
Yeah, amazing. And then I guess the guys have touched on this a little bit, but what's your opinion on how AI is going to integrate with the software versus the human touch that's innately recruitment?
Yeah. I'm hearing so many different reports and relate to the themes that Callam and Nick mentioned. There's the awareness around, particularly if I talk about candidate resumes, having an awareness that that could have been, you know, this amazing resume could be supported by using Canva, and then AI sort of jazzed it up with the wording, and then feeling underwhelmed when you actually get to meet the candidate. So that's where the human factor comes in, because then a human talks to another human and gets understands the dynamic and the connection, and gets some depth about the candidate's suitability. And I think the positive is we've heard lots about skill shortages. There's a lot we can do with adapting talent and capability in some areas and not in others. For example, doctors need specific training. You can't necessarily adapt someone into that role, but AI can take away those low-level tasks that they get taken occupied with, so then they can focus on more the high-quality work, as an example. So AI is going to really, it's going to bring in so many efficiencies, and allow us to be able to do more quality, complex kind of parts of our job that we enjoy doing. Thanks.
Nice, thank you, Kate. And we have come to the end of our discussion today, so we have some time for questions. I've got a couple here. I think Callam, this one probably suitable for you. Not 100% sure if you'll be able to answer it. From Charlotte, are there any particular industries that are more likely to mention language learning model Gen AI in their ads, and what's the context of the change, noting company use or skill set requirements?
Yeah, so it varies considerably across different sectors, actually. Right now, there is a strong concentration within the tech sector. So we're talking about data analytics, we're talking about things like software development, we're seeing it a bit in scientific research as well. And that makes sense, right? A lot of those roles are going to be involved in sort of the development of these tools. We're beginning to see greater usage among other non-tech sectors, which involves more of the working with these tools. So you don't need to know how to develop, a machine learning algorithm or anything like that. You just need to be able to understand prompts and be able to utilize these tools within your workflow. So the first step was definitely the tech side, the development side. We're increasingly seeing the other side of it. But we're seeing sort of very strong growth in both the tech and the non-tech side. It's just at very different levels right now. So there's some of our global markets in an area like data analytics, around 10, 11, 12% of job postings will mention Gen AI tools today, which is obviously a very high percentage, and it's increasing by the day. Whereas if you're looking at the non-tech sector, even in the most prominent non-tech sectors, you might be seeing closer to 1% of job postings mentioning these tools. As I mentioned earlier, overall it's around 0.24%, but behind those numbers is a lot of variation across the different sectors in terms of usage, other than to say that all those numbers are increasing quite rapidly.
Nick, I think I'll ask this one to you. It's from Crispin. I've lost it. There it is. What is a good source of time to start and other metric benchmarks?
Ooh, in terms of be good if this was interactive. So I think the question might be about how do you benchmark a sourcing timeline and time frame? Sure. So the short answer here is that there's a number of different sources to do that. One of the things that I'd be looking to start with is candidate experience data. I'd also be looking to start with cost of vacancy data. So the time to offer and time to start data is not always the be all and end all. We would rather focus holistically in industry about the quality of the hiring process that's done, and the net impact of having that role fulfilled by qualified, high-performing talent, rather than just closing a gap. I think traditional hygiene factors like that are prominent in recruitment because they typically relate to cost, but they relate to cost in different ways in different industries. So if you are in healthcare and you can't fill your nurse's shift, there's a certain cost and a certain incentive to fill that very, very quickly. If you're in hospitality, that incentive is different. So I think the first thing I'd say is concentrate on those two data sources around understanding what the net impact of a role being open looks like. Establishing appropriate benchmarks. We often find the best way to do that is literally to talk to competing organizations. There is a little bit of data out there supplied by the great folks at Indeed and others, which tell us things like the time of an application experience. It's quite challenging to get the full view of, you know, what time to start would look like. But we know absolutely that time kills deals. So the shorter in relative terms that the application to offer journey can be, you've got less likelihood to muck it up, and more likelihood if you can communicate well to sell your benefits quickly and engage that candidate and move them through the offer process. So multiple sources there. And I think the overlay with candidate experience data is to measure both successful candidate experience, unsuccessful candidate experience, and adding to that candidates that were not even put through the selection process. So survey everyone and understand the parts of the process that they felt took too long, because ultimately that data is just as important as the cost associated with a gap, because giving the external talent a really good experience is obviously going to pay dividends in terms of creating a highly engaged talent community. So there'll be lots of secrets in there around different parts of your process that can be shortened or tweaked to be able to give a better experience upstream.
Nice, thanks, Nick. This one, maybe Nick or Kate, you can, it's a little trickier. It's for smaller businesses who don't have much room for employee benefits or perks. What other ways can they attract good talent? They don't, they say, they don't even offer the basics like remote work, ERP, or paid parental leave. So she's wondering if there are any other suggestions on this.
Shall I jump in, Nick? I would say if it's about authenticity. So being able to show the culture, the community spirit, all the positives that you feel live or part of that culture, and try and bring it to life. There are tools where you can just use your phone as a video just to show, you know, I remember I used to do this in the last role. We were running a TA team, and we used to have the hiring manager describe the job, the team, what it was like to work for the business on a video. And we didn't spend a lot of money on it, and then we would post that. And some job sites allow you to do that, or you can put it on your own website and let it divert to your website. But that's a really good way to do it.
Thanks, Kate. Callam, this one's for you from Ashley. You talked about the gap between when job seekers seek work and when employers advertise, and that savvy employers would take advantage of this behaviour. How would you suggest they do so?
Well, I think once you know, employees have that information, they understand that the pattern of job seeker behaviour, I think it's relatively easy for them to adjust when they do their hiring. Admittedly, I'm saying that as someone who's not involved in hiring himself, so there's probably complexities behind the scenes that I'm not necessarily seeing. But
I can jump in on that. I'll help you out. Yeah.
I'm just looking and saying, okay, well, you know, if job seekers are so much more active in January than at any other time of year, maybe it makes a little bit of sense to shift some of that hiring activity that maybe you want to do in November a couple of months later, and then you make it much more easy to attract candidates. But there's no doubt complexities to that, and I'm happy to be educated on that front.
You're right. And where that's possible, that makes sense. And where things like headcount costs make that hard, then that activity for hiring maybe changes to talent pooling. So we know absolutely, and I can't share any data here, but it is to say that always on recruitment strategies, which is to say those who are always sourcing, continually addressing markets, continually advertising, continually proactively reaching out to candidates, have much more success than those are reactive. So only advertising or only posting when jobs are available. So I think the right approach here is to concentrate where possible on getting as best demand signal as you possibly can about what vacancies are needed. The data might tell you some stories about consistent role requirements that you've got, and setting about ways to programmatically always address the market proactively through advertising, through marketing, and having your teams always engaging with talent, sort of smooth that out and make sure you're consistently engaging your talent pool, so that when that hiring activity does come, you've already engaged the lion's share of that talent. And to Kate's great point earlier, there's inherent trust in the brand, knowledge of the brand, benefits, etc. It makes that early engagement phase so much quicker and higher quality than it would do if you're like cold addressing the market.
Thanks, guys. We'll do one final question. I'm not 100% sure, Callam, you're going to be able to answer this, but Faith has asked, do you have any data on candidates willing to relocate to a different state for the right role?
Yeah, this one's a challenging one. So one thing we can do on the Indeed platform is track, international or interstate clicks and applies. But where it becomes more difficult is you don't see the outcome of that activity. So we don't know who gets the job, who doesn't get the job. We also know that a lot of people will click on jobs from interstate or overseas, but not really have an intention to make that move. They might just be sort of dipping their toes in the water or just generally seeing what's out there. I know I've certainly done that in the past as well. So there's a little bit more noise with those data sets that I think make it a little bit more difficult to really interpret the results in a strong manner. So unfortunately, there's probably not a good answer there. What we can do is probably track changes over time. So if you see a big shift in the number of job seekers looking towards Western Australia, for example, that might mean something. Maybe the WA economy is doing really strong relative to maybe Victoria or New South Wales. Suddenly WA is more attractive, and so it's attracting more job seeker attention. Again, we don't know how that flows through to interstate migration or willingness to make that move, but it's probably increased just by virtue of the fact that there's a greater flow of job seeker activity towards that state. But in terms of the raw numbers, they do tend to be a little bit more difficult to interpret than ideally I would like.
Spoken like a true economist. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everyone. What a fantastic discussion. Special thanks to Callam, Nick, and Kate for their valuable time and joining us today. We hope you found it insightful. We are going to quickly put up a quick poll if you don't mind completing it and tell us how you found today. Then keep an eye out on your emails. We'll be sending out our new white paper on how AI is revolutionizing recruitment this afternoon. And we'll also send the recording for today's session next week. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.